Hi everybody, I hope you're doing great. It's Ren speaking here from my car, which I think is a first, so let's celebrate an INFJ making a video from his car. Today I wanted to make a video, admittedly a little bit late compared to usual, sorry about that, about those of you who are probably, I'm sure there are some among you who are like this. In fact, whether or not you're INFJ is not really the deepest aspect of the matter, but you're still engaged in a sort of soul searching. You're still searching for your type. You might not be 0% sure of what your type is, but you're not 100% sure either. You are kind of, maybe you're 80-20, 70-30, 90-8, 20-80, whatever it might be, but you're still engaged in a search. And usually that's the way it's manifested is people usually, and I've been there before, admittedly a good few years ago now, where you're still a bit sensitive about what your type identification might be. You're still experiencing occasional skepticism about, say, being INFJ or being ISFP or ENTJ or ENFP. You're still finding different descriptions attractive. And you cannot help but from time to time you read an article about a type that you thought you were not, and you realize, maybe I could be that type. There's a category of people for whom this no longer happens. There's a category of people, and I belong to this category now. I think I sort of have come to accept, that's okay, INFJ is my type. And there's many among you who will also be in that category. But I'd say there'll be many among you who are not quite there yet. In fact, some people never get there because they love the idea of searching, and that's okay too in a sense. But I just wanted to give my perspective and maybe some advice for those who wish they could find get to a final destination and in fact settle in their type. Because people who have pretty much accepted, okay, this is my type, I'm INTP, I'm ISTJ, and so on, they still engage. There's many that still engage with typology. But they look at it slightly differently. They're no longer looking at it primarily to identify what type they are, but more so to how to exploit the possibilities of that type as best they can in everyday life, in relationships, at the workplace. There are those who just love the idea of exploring the particular kinds of consciousness that attend to having that kind of type. How do they see things? What is their brain like, and so on. But I'm not talking about these people today. I'm really addressing those of you who just don't know what your type is, or you're not 100% sure, and there's a part of you where this impossibility to quite get settled maybe irks you a little bit, tickles you a little bit. And I want to say there's a few things to be aware of when you're engaged on that path. And there's a risk, I don't want to say it's a huge risk, but it is a risk, that you end up reading so much content about so many different types. Perhaps you have settled that you're an N type and not an S type, but that still leaves a lot of types, available. Perhaps you've identified that you're not just an N type, but an F type. That still leaves a lot of types, potentially your type. Often people who still hesitate will have done some level of discrimination. But the risk, like I was saying, is that you end up doing so much reading. So you've read all you could read on NI, you've read all you could read on FE, on TI, on FI, on SE. And there's a moments where you sort of get lost, where you're like, okay, wait a second. So I've read a lot about all these different functions, and there's ways in which I can sort of identify with all of them. You get lost because you're just it's almost like a saturation of information, and you just don't quite know where you stand anymore. You've lost your bearings, and instead of getting to a point where you have more clarity and more certainty about your type, you almost feel like the effect is the opposite, and you have more uncertainty and skepticism, and you just feel kind of ungrounded and rootless. I think it's quite a common experience. And so if you experience this, don't worry, that happens. It's usually part of the process of becoming knowledgeable about type and your type anyway. So, it's it shouldn't be a source of worry. But a good way to sort of become grounded again, sort of get to a stage where you can be in touch with certainty again, is to actually go back to some basics. Really, it's funny to say, but for all the readings that we do about different cognitive functions, about different types, and we go in detail. Maybe some people have read my book on the INFJ, the Ecstatic Soul, which is available, by the way, still available. The link's below. My book on the INFJ consciousness. You know that it has a sequel, which is more focused on INFJ life in the modern world, so more how to live rather than how our brains work. How to find meaning, purposefulness, a full existence, thriving as INFJs in a world that at first sight seems increasingly fast-paced and hostile to the way we function. So if you want to get that book, it's right there, The Infinite Soul, right? And look, it's a very nice little product. It's less than $10, and all the first link below. If you want to get this book, the first link below. Okay, so go back to some basics. So for example, I'll just give you an example. How are you going to sort out that you're an INFJ and not an INFP, right? It's ultimately, people might think that by doing all the readings in the world, they will finally decide that they're INFJ and not INFP, or the reverse. Often what happens is that you become more scholarly, but more confused about what you are, because again, there's a difference between like becoming knowledgeable about functions and immediately instinctively knowing which functions you operate with. There is in this sense, a familiar, if you like, segregation between knowledge, right, acquired knowledge, and instinct. Instinct often goes against knowledge, or knowledge distances you from instinct, and the decision that you make regarding what type you are is ultimately going to be based on instinct, or what sometimes we like to call a gut feeling. Informed by knowledge, informed by readings and watching videos, but what will just like clinch the issue, what will just make you decide once and for all, will be an instinctual move. And for that you need some simple markers. So for INFJ versus INFP, sure, read on FI, read on NE, read on NI, read on SI, and so on. But ultimately, there are just some simple questions you can ask yourself. And those are the questions, I think, that will just be the final deal breakers. However simple they sound, and however unsexy it might be to consider that, ultimately our moment of decision is determined by these questions. They are, I think, the determiners. So for instance, again, it's very simple questions, and I've addressed this to some extent in my shorts, like in my 1-minute shorts that I've been releasing recently. I've been trying to go that direction because I think it is useful for people who've become distanced by too much knowledge at the expense of instinct or intuition. If you're an INFJ, or if you're an INFP people are not people who just have like a couple ideas that guide their lives and about which they're super focused and knowledgeable, and that they can expand at will, like, over long text or conversations. There are people who have many different ideas across the day. They get stimulated by that external environment, extrovert perception, and they tend to struggle, in fact, with managing to let a few ideas guide their life, because sometimes you really need that focus in life, and INFP struggle with that. With INFJs, it's exactly the reverse. INFJs are people with only a few guiding ideas in their life, right? Usually aggregating other ideas into, making them subordinate to that main idea. Read the works of Dostoevsky and you'll get that. With FI versus FE, again, ask yourself the question, when it comes to expressing your states of feeling, your emotional states, it's just not possible to be an INFJ if, when you express them, you express them very candidly, without filter, without a rationalizing filter, which is what FE does. The FE of INFJs does that all the time. An INFJ can very well be more sensitive than an INFP. There's nothing indicating that that's not possible. It certainly can be possible. But when it comes to articulating those emotional states in language, INFJs are more controlled. INFJs rationalize. So they will take an emotion, even an emotion that they have felt very strongly, but the way that they discuss it, it's almost like a scholar or a forensic scientist discussing it, which can sometimes surprise, say, a shrink if you go see them. With an INFP, but in fact, even with an INTJ, INTJs are just more private, but if you really talk to an INTJ that trusts you about their emotional states, they're much more unfiltered. They just speak directly about the emotion. They don't add that rationalizing filter that they would add about other things in their life. INFJs, in this respect, very much like INTPs. And ENFJs. ENFJs are the same. They talk about their emotional state through a filter of rationalization, the control, if you like, that neutralizes those states as they are conveyed to other people. They're externalized. And that comes from the extroversion of Effie. So those are two examples. Just very simple. Ask yourself, are you guided by a few ideas in your life or many ideas that conflict and compete for your attention? And when you express your emotional states, do you tend to rationalize and distance yourself from the states, or do you just share them raw? And that will guide you at least towards, whether you're on the NISE axis or an ESI axis for the first element, and the FETI axis versus the FIT axis for the second. So that's just an example. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if that's any way helpful. And guys, I will certainly see you at the weekend. In fact, before that, in shorts probably. All right, take care, guys. Bye-bye.